In this lecture, I'm going to be going over a few different functions of Unreal, including deferred decals and the post-processing stack to help you add some cool effects to your scenes. To add a post-processing stack, search the classes in the modes window for post-process and drag in the one that says post-process volume. I'm going to go back into normal view here by pressing G if you were in game view. Remember, you can switch between those. Now here is the post-process volume, and it's only going to affect whatever happens inside of this cube. So let's say I went into the color grading and turned the global offset all the way to red. If I'm far away from the cube, it's not going to really do anything. But as I start to come near the cube and its volume, this can be useful if you have lots of different zones in your game in the same level and you want people to be able to instantly switch into those zones. But for the purposes of this level, I'm going to drag it right over here where we will be normally. I'm just going to scale it up a lot so that it encompasses the entire area. Alright, now that I've got my post-process volume, I'm going to go over the different things that you can do with it. So make sure you select it in the world outliner, and then we're going to start going through these. So the first one is lens, and here we go. The first category here is mobile depth of field. So this is depth of field that's going to work on mobile. I know that some of you would like to develop these kinds of things for mobile, and while the Megascans assets themselves typically are pretty performance heavy, you can achieve the mobile quality if you just don't use the top level LODs and you don't use the very high resolution textures. Another thing you can do is utilize these mobile options of many of these effects, such as mobile depth of field. Now, I'm not going to go over the mobile depth of field in depth because I'm going to do the normal depth of field. Now here we have bloom, and you probably know what bloom is, but if not, I will just show you right here. So for any of these effects, you're going to have to check this box to enable them, or to be able to edit them. And so for intensity, as you can see, that adds brightness to the bloom effect. Essentially what bloom does is it takes the bright portions of the scene and adds a foggy glow around it, and it looks pretty beautiful, and you'll see a lot of games overuse it a lot. Now if you don't like what you've done and it's just far gone and you want to reset it to the default, any of these parameters, you can just click this yellow arrow and it'll snap right back to the default. Now I'm not going to go any further into bloom. Exposure, I'm sure you know what exposure is. You can adjust it in this window right here. Now chromatic aberration is an interesting one, and I don't see it very obviously used a lot. So you're going to want to start with this intensity, and if you increase it, this is what chromatic aberration looks like. Now sometimes it's interesting to just have a little bit of it like right on the edges of the frame, because you can see that doesn't really make much of a difference, it doesn't seem like, but it's just a subconscious thing that kind of looks cool, and you can really notice it when you snap it back because everything goes super sharp in the corners again. It's kind of like a vignette, except it has an effect of blurring the corners a little bit. Now as for camera, these are going to affect the actual camera settings of the camera that I'm looking through right now at the scene. So that includes the shutter speed, the ISO, the aperture. Now lens flares are something that you'll probably want to use. If you check the box that says intensity, you'll start to see a lens flare. And then from here you can adjust the size if you check the box that says bokeh size. I like the more blurred out look where you can just kind of barely see it. I think that's pretty realistic. And as far as tint, you can change the color of the bokeh to a certain extent. Notice how you can see how pink it is right here. If I tint it other colors, you can see how it is. Now I'm going to turn it to an orange color and then water it down a little bit by bringing it more towards the white center. I'm going to increase the bokeh size a little bit so that we get that more spread out look. And next we have image effects. One of these is vignette intensity, and that's a pretty self-explanatory one. I like to keep it just around where the default is. It seems like it just works perfectly, and sometimes maybe I'll go a little further than that. If you're looking for a dramatic look, then you definitely want to increase the vignette intensity. Additionally, if you want, you can add grain to the scene. I haven't really seen this used very much in games, but if that's what you want to do, that is a creative option that is available to you. Now let's talk about depth of field, because this is one of my favorite settings ever. Let's say I want to capture a dramatic image of this plant right here. I can go into my depth of field settings, check focal distance, check the depth blur, and I'm going to increase the depth blur. And I'm going to increase the focal distance just a little bit, except it's going to end up increasing it a lot. So I would suggest manually typing in numbers for this. Start with 10 and go in increments of 5, so 15, 20, so getting closer, 25, 30 maybe. 30 seems to work. And now we have a cool little shot of a plant with all the blurred background. And now that I have depth of field enabled, and I actually am going to decrease it down to 20 to increase the blur in the background. Now I can get really cool close-up shots of pretty much anything, and it blurs everything in the background and it makes it look just super cool. Now color grading may not add to the photorealism, but it will add to the epic reality bit that we talked about earlier. Now I know that many of you will not be color grading experts, so I'm just going to tell you the basics here. The global is going to affect everything, and the one that has the most effect that you'll notice is this offset, and it's going to basically offset all the colors in the scene in the direction of whichever color you drag this circle on the wheel. And I'd like to invite you to extend this window out so that you can see the entire wheel. Gain essentially will multiply colors towards whichever direction. And as far as all of these others, you can try them out, you can experiment, and you can try to create a cool look. For this one, I will most likely be going for a yellowy, orange, and pink kind of look. But there's actually a really easy way to do this, and that is to go into the miscellaneous, and then you can check this box that says color grading LUT. And what that is a lookup texture for how they should color grade your scene for you. So instead of you going in, editing what the shadows look like, the midtones, the highlights, you can just drop one of these things in, and it'll do it for you. Now, I've managed to locate a pack of tons of these for free. They're in UAsset format, so when you download them all, you'll need to go into your content folder and drag them into your content folder. And then they will appear down in your content browser. And now you can start dragging them into your lookup texture box. Now, the one that I was messing around with these, and the one that I like the most is fall. So you can drag them in, you can swap them out, and see which ones you like the best. And if you don't like any of them, you can, of course, go right back to the default by pressing this yellow arrow. I really like fall. Under rendering features, here's some of the main things under render features. Ambient occlusion you can adjust with this intensity. And as you can see on the rock shadows, more intensity will add more of that shadow depth to the crevices. Now, I think that more of this really just adds to a dramatic vibe. So if that's what you're going for, you're going to want to go for a higher ambient occlusion. If you want to change the motion blur amount, you can do that right here. And the final setting is screen percentage. Now you can set this to 100, and that's what normal people do. Or if for some reason you have insanely good hardware, you could change it to 200 or even 400, and then when you play it, basically it will be rendering at 2 times the resolution, which is crazy. So you can also preview this by pressing this arrow and changing the screen percentage, and then it will be that way in the viewport, and it makes things look sharper, but it comes at a very high performance cost.